Hi again, everyone. Welcome to College Football Coast to Coast. This is our 9th edition here on Blab. I'm Mark Rogers of MarkRogersTV, setting you up for bowl season. So if you check out my picks on YouTube, you know in the past I've hit about 65% against the spread. The goal is 80% straight up, 60% against the spread. You know that if you like to spend a buck or two, that should do you pretty well. So I picked the two games for today. Check those out on YouTube. We got Central Michigan out of the MAC taking on Minnesota in the Quick Lane Bowl at 5 o'clock on ESPN2. And we've got a game coming up here in just about 90 minutes or less with Pitt taking on Navy. Intriguing matchup with the ACC taking on the American Athletic Conference in the Military Bowl. And the only game that's played at a home site with the Midshipmen at home coming off a fine 10-2 campaign. And if you follow things outside the Power Five, in the group of five, you know that the top four in the American Athletic acquitted themselves rather well against the big boys, Temple, Memphis, and also Navy and Houston, especially. And the Cougars have a date, of course, with Florida State on New Year's Day. So I like Navy in this one, minus the 2.5 to cover against Pitt. Should be medium scoring, low to mid-20s. And Pitt not very explosive on offense. Nathan Peterman at quarterbacks, game manager, workman-like kind of guy. And if we've had any open seats, I see some possible questions here. Got James on the line, who has joined us in the past. James, a Michigan fan, of course. The Wolverines with a date against Florida. A couple programs that look to be on the rise with new head coaches, with the Gators winning the SEC Eastern Division Championship and Michigan coming back with 9 wins. Well, right now, I'm gonna save my official pick, Jim, but I'm gonna like Michigan in this one. I just think they're more balanced offense and defense. Florida really struggled with Treon Harris at quarterback once Will Grier was suspended for PEDs, and if you haven't heard, Will Grier has decided to transfer out of Florida. I don't really understand the decision, since if he's going to play at that level, whether he goes to junior college or not, once he steps back onto a field in FBS play or even Division II play, anything sanctioned by the NCAA, he's going to have to serve that 1-year suspension. Michigan more balanced on offense. Jake Rudock and that wide receiver core came into its own late in the season. The defense, the run defense, yes. Really exposed by Ezekiel Elliott and also Jordan Howard of Indiana. The Michigan run defense, which we thought was to be rock solid early in the year and was, with a tremendous front seven, I think was exposed a bit because the linebackers are really good, but they're not real athletic guys. So they've got a lot of run stuffing guys inside the tackles at linebacker. With the group that they have there, and they've lost some significant talent up front due to injury late in the season, and Indiana hit them up pretty well for 41 points and took them to overtime. And the Michigan-Ohio State game with the Buckeyes and Ezekiel Elliott running wild. So that could be a problem, and Kelvin Taylor presents an interesting challenge again for Michigan. He is a tough runner with the skill to make a sound decision to leave early to enter the NFL draft. So the one positive for Michigan in that matchup is that you got a block for the back, and Florida's biggest issue, aside from Treon Harris at quarterback, is offensive line. It's abysmal. It was thin to start the year. They lost players, and attrition usually hits hard along a thin offensive line, and so they lost more players throughout the season, and Florida having issues blocking anyone. So that could be a game in which we see not prolific scoring despite heavy playmakers on each side on the perimeter. And I really like Michigan's wide receivers, but they are facing, possibly with Ohio State, the best secondary they will see this season. So that's the Citrus Bowl, with Michigan taking on Florida a little bit later this week. And again, we've got Navy Pitt. We got Minnesota out of the Big Ten taking on Central Michigan later today. You check out my YouTube channel. Had a really good discussion with bloggers from Clemson and Oklahoma yesterday on the Orange Bowl national semifinal matchup. Matt Hofeld from Crimson and Cream Machine And from Shaking the Southland, Ryan Cantor, a couple SB Nation bloggers who really know their stuff concerning Oklahoma and Clemson. We sized up all the matchups, offense versus defense, and special teams as well. Also, why is Oklahoma a favorite? The thing that I took away from that game is the X factor of Sterling Shepard, wide receiver for Oklahoma, close to 90 receptions, 1,300 yards, exceptional kid who can really play all over the field. And that's going to be what Oklahoma wants to do to confuse Clemson. Clemson's most likely, according to Ryan, going to counter with just shadowing Mackenzie Alexander, who was one of the great cover corners in college football, just a sophomore with tons of talent. They're just going to shadow Sterling Shepard and not try to mess up that situation and just lock down best player on best player. Then Oklahoma has options and a couple of guys that emerged late in the season, most notably with Deed Westbrook and Deron Neal, who both caught 42 passes. I would say the decided advantage for Clemson is defensive line with Shaq Lawson and company against an Oklahoma offensive line that's decent, not great. And then the decided advantage for Oklahoma is that they have two running backs who are elite in Samaje Perine and also Joe Mixon are exceptional backs. Perine, 1,300 yards coming off the 1,700 last year. So he's not in decline. He just had to share the football with Joe Mixon this year, who was a five-star recruit that Oklahoma stole from a number of teams, who ran for 750, 6.8 per carry for Joe Mixon. And so that's Oklahoma. Clemson, of course, both bloggers and both defenses very concerned about the playmaking ability of each quarterback in talking about Baker Mayfield and Deshaun Watson, both those guys with 42 touchdowns this year. Knight Rider, how you doing, man? Hopefully you can join us here at 2 o'clock with Marty. We're going to go from about 1 to 1:30 on this one. Knight Rider likes OU. I've yet to decide this one. I'll release a pick here in the next few days. I think this is going to be a fun one, as expected, high scoring. The defenses are good, but they have their issues, and the offenses are explosive and really have few weaknesses. The one weakness for Oklahoma would be the offensive line, and that's not a good place to have a weakness, but it's a relative weakness. They're just not elite. They have a good offensive line, but they've been hit with some injuries and a few breakdowns in the offensive line. Clemson giving up big plays. Yeah, it's going to be a battle. Clemson giving up big plays to some decent teams, but North Carolina State really ran them around about 6 weeks ago for 41 points. Jacoby Brissett, another dual threat quarterback. And North Carolina, despite being ineffective from an efficiency passing standpoint, 13 of 33, North Carolina hit them up for a ton of big plays and stayed in that game until the final possession. Clemson and OU, again, check out our YouTube video. It's also on Shaking the Southland and also on Crimson and Cream Machine on SB Nation. A couple of SB Nation bloggers who really know their stuff breaking down the Orange Bowl. Talk some Sugar Bowl with Gerald Tracy from Cowboys Ride for Free. That's the Ole Miss Oklahoma State game on New Year's night. A Big 12 SEC matchup that has been the contracted matchup there in the Sugar for just a couple years. Robert Kimdichie, old drug issues, marijuana possession, fell out of a balcony, and he's done. He's done for his college career. He's probably going to be done anyway after this game. He's moving on to the NFL. I don't expect that to hurt his draft stock much. My one disagreement with our blogger we had on yesterday, when I say much, 10 to 12 spots, 15 spots, something like that in terms of NFL draft stock, somebody's going to take a chance. When you get 32 teams, and I'm not saying that the Raiders run their front office like they did back in the heyday or even as of the last 5 years. So I'm pointing out teams that are more apt to gamble on a character issue guy. And Robert Kimdichie actually in his 3 years at Ole Miss had no other issues before that. Nothing significant, showed up and played, did a great job. Number 1 overall selection out of high school, number 1 overall player. And despite the stats, this was my one contention with our blogger, Gerald Tracy. Wasn't Gerald Tracy, Thomas Fleming. Sorry, it's usually Gerald. Thomas Fleming from Cowboys Ride for Free is Kim Dichie. He was a stud his entire career. He's double and triple teamed. His stat line's not going to look impressive. He had like 7 tackles for loss and 3 sacks, but he gets all the attention. So that's a big loss for the Rebels. Chad Kelly slings it around and really can fire the football, but he also throws a lot of picks. He had 12 this year. And that was my one concern getting back to the Orange Bowl with Deshaun Watson, who is a freshman, had an incredible stat line. When you think about it, a freshman, a true freshman, 69%, 14 TDs, 2 picks, played 3/4 of the season through 2 interceptions. This year, 11 picks. And so I wanted to delve a little bit deeper because we know that stats can lie. And for Deshaun Watson, though, he trusted his receivers a little bit too much. A lot of jump balls that were contested and picked off by the defense. So Deshaun Watson can't turn it over like that in the Orange Bowl and expect to win. Still mulling this one over, as I do to the last hour with most of these games. So back to the sugar. Mason Rudolph, the #1 quarterback for Oklahoma State, played every game of the season until Bedlam. Then he was knocked out with an injury, threw for 3,600 yards and 21 touchdowns. So they brought in J.W. Walsh. This kid's stat line is just kind of amusing for people that are into stats because he only threw like 70 passes, 13 touchdowns, 11 rushing touchdowns. So what does that tell you? He's a red zone specialist. So he benefits from taking those snaps inside the 10-yard line, threw for 13 touchdowns, 11 rushing, 24 touchdowns. He only threw 70 passes, but we're going to see a lot of both quarterbacks most likely in this game. So Oklahoma State goes with 2 guys in Mason Rudolph and J.W. Walsh. Not a lot of name or star power on this Oklahoma State offense, but you'll want to look out for James Washington, who caught 52 balls, 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns. Chris Carson is their main back. He only ran for 500 yards and 4.2 per pop. So that's a bit of a concern. If you look at the numbers of the top backs in the nation, they're at 6.5 yards a carry. So 4.2 rushing in the Big 12 against those will be kind marginal defenses. That's a concern. And Oklahoma State played 3 lousy teams in the non-conference schedule, didn't play anyone outside the Big 12. And so they were fairly marginal running the football. So that's a concern whether Oklahoma State's going to have enough to score on Ole Miss. And I'm leaning heavily toward the Rebels, despite their showing against the Big 12 in the Peach Bowl last year. Maybe they've learned from that. Or maybe, hey, they just got throttled by a TCU team that was red hot on fire and could have been in the college football playoff. Breakdown of the USC-Wisconsin game, one that I'm really looking forward to. The Big Ten and the Pac-12 getting together, USC and Wisconsin in the Holiday Bowl. That is on Wednesday night. So I've got a breakdown coming up at 3 o'clock with Nick Dempsey, who writes for Conquest Chronicles, the SB Nation platform for USC. And I also knocked out a preview. I kind of jumped the gun myself and kind of gave it a whirl on USC and Wisconsin. So check that out on my YouTube channel as well at MarkRogersTV. So anything you'd like to discuss concerning college football, there's certainly plenty to talk about with bowl games all over the place. We've got 2 today. It's a bit of a light day because ESPN's got Monday Night Football tonight, and then cranked up with, I believe, 5 games tomorrow, and including North Carolina and Baylor. And I've got previews released on that one with ACC and Big 12 bloggers on my channel, Mark Rogers TV. UNC and Baylor hobbling on offense. So lost their starting quarterback, Seth Russell, midway through the season, had 29 touchdowns at that point. Lost their backup quarterback, a 5-star out of high school, true freshman, Jarrett Stidham, my apologies. I work with anyway, Jarrett Stidham, 12 TDs and 2 picks. And so he was playing well, although they had certainly taken a step down offensively with the freshman at quarterback, but they lost Stidham, and he's not going to be able to make it back to the bowl game. So they're going with their 3rd-string quarterback in Chris Johnson, which is actually good news for Baylor because in the season finale against Texas, they had to go with their 4th-stringer, who's really not a quarterback. He's a running back, Lynx Hawthorne, who had to take snaps, and they ran the veer option offense out of that, and that's not what Baylor does. They were so depleted throwing the football that their top wide receiver, who's arguably the best in the nation, Corey Coleman, had 20 touchdown receptions through 8 games. He was on pace to shatter the Big 12 receiving record for touchdowns in a single season. Didn't catch a single touchdown in the last 4 games. It was a mess on offense for Baylor. So they miss their starting quarterback, backup quarterback. They're going with their third stringer, Chris Johnson. And he's had little audition time for us to know what he's going to bring. He played well in the second half against TCU, or against Oklahoma State when Baylor won that game. Played a TCU team in a monsoon, so it's tough to track that game. It was fun to watch, but can't really get a gauge on offensive football in a monsoon. And then he played the first 4 possessions against Texas before he got knocked out. Baylor also missing Shock Linwood, their 1,300-yard back. And so they're hobbled on offense. And also Corey Coleman has a sports hernia, the best wide receiver possibly in college football. So Baylor missing 2 quarterbacks, best running back, and best wide receiver. North Carolina pretty much at full strength. So the Heels and the Baylor Bears, it expected at one time to be a shootout. I don't know what to expect from this game with Baylor missing so much on offense. Baylor, fortunately, despite not being known for defense, brings 3 studs up front, led by Andrew Billings and Sean Oakman up front for Baylor. They can really get after the quarterback. So I expect this still to be a very competitive football game with North Carolina and Baylor, probably the under-the-radar game of the bowl season. Russell Athletic Bowl, we typically don't expect a whole lot from that matchup, but in recent years with the ACC and the Big 12 sending their third place and third seeded teams down to that game, it's been Oklahoma Clemson last year. Turned out to be a horrible game, but a great matchup on paper. And this year, Baylor and North Carolina. So that's the rundown for the bowl games. We also have Cal and Air Force in the Armed Forces Bowl tomorrow. 2 very contrasting styles with Jared Goff throwing the ball all over the place against Air Force, who's going to be much like what we see with Navy and the triple option tomorrow. We mentioned North Carolina and Baylor. We also have a game with LSU taking on Texas Tech. So another SEC Big 12 matchup. Had some lively debate and discussion last week on our various conference shows on Wednesday night. Check those out on YouTube. The MarkRogersTV, ACC breakdown, Big 12 breakdown, Pac-12 breakdown on whether the bowls matter, why do they matter, if they do in fact matter, and also can we make any conclusions from bowl season on which conference is best? Do these matchups matter? In my opinion, they matter for this reason. We can't conjecture on motivation. So I know that that's a big theme during bowl season, and I believe it, but I can't measure that. I can't assume that a team that had a disappointing season that expects itself to be elite, but dropped down to a 3rd or 4th tier bowl is not going to be motivated. We can guess that. It seems to be possibly the assumption, but we can't gauge and can't get into the hearts and minds of young men. And there's 100 players on a football team. 80 of them might be motivated, but the most important 20 might not be. But we don't know. We can only go by the results. And unlike the non-conference games the first 3 weeks of college football, where we see some really intriguing matchups this past year, Alabama, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Oregon, of course, the number of Notre Dame matchups against the likes of USC, Stanford, Clemson, all those matchups that we see, Oklahoma, Tennessee, they're not like seeded games because obviously they don't base them on standings. They just go out and create matchups and go out and each school goes out and contracts matchups with other schools. But during the bowl season, we have like seeded matchups. So we can take a 5th place team from the Big Ten against a 5th place team from the SEC. We can take like-seeded matchups. Look at the 3 games between the Big Ten and the SEC. Penn State, Georgia. I think that's slightly slanted toward the SEC, though, because Georgia was 9-3 and Penn State 7-5. But stay with me here. Michigan, Florida, and also Tennessee and Northwestern. Those are like-seeded teams playing against each other. So if the Big Ten goes 2-1 or the SEC goes 2-1, or even if there's a sweep, I'm not saying that guarantees and that's locked down the argument and the case that conference is better than the other conference. But it's a good indication. It at least gives us a level playing field to evaluate these teams and therefore evaluate the conferences. So that's my take on conference play and conference evaluation during bowl play, is that we see like-seeded teams playing each other for the first time all season, for the only time all season, because we don't have enough non-conference games in the pre-conference schedule to evaluate these teams. If you go across college football and you take all the FBS Power 5 teams, there's like 66 in the 5 major conferences. Most of them play one Power 5 opponent. Some of them this season, Baylor, North Carolina State, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, didn't play anyone. And that's ridiculous. And I applaud these conferences for forcing, going into the future, forcing their members of that conference to play a Power 5 team. I think they should play 2. When you've got 4 non-conference games, you can play 2 against Power 5 competition. Then play a group of 5 and then play an FCS. I actually have a formula for scheduling in college football that would take it completely out of the school's hands and, like the NFL, would base it on last year's standings. Unlike the NFL, I'm not trying to create parity, so the NFL weights it. So if you're the New England Patriots and you finished first last year, you get a tougher schedule. And if you're the Cleveland Browns and you finished last, you get a worse schedule within the conference. I wouldn't weight it like that. I would make it level. So whether you're Purdue and you're the last place team in the Big Ten and you're Alabama, the first place team in the SEC, I would make an even playing field based on last year's standings. We can't, of course, predict how good the teams are going to be this year, but I would base it on last year's standings and create a level playing field of a schedule in the non-conference. So again, that's what we got. We had a number of teams, not playing anyone in the Power 5, unfortunately. Those are the teams that come to mind. Baylor's always thrown out as being the poster child for avoiding everyone. And that's unfortunate. Baylor schedules like it's Baylor of 1995 and not Baylor of post RG3. We need to see the Baylor Bears play somebody. All right, Knight Rider, I appreciate you jumping on here. Not a whole lot of action here. We're trying to get ourselves established here on Blab. So I know that's going to take some time. I've done a poor job of marketing on Twitter and Facebook and otherwise. So I will do that in the future. But I appreciate you jumping on. Also, James, big Michigan fan, looking forward to the Citrus Bowl on New Year's Day a little bit later. So I think I'm going to hop off and get prepared for a big show with Marty McPadden at the top of the hour, 2 o'clock Eastern time, behind the scenes, where we step off the college football beat and we talk some television. And of course, that means really internet production in front of and behind the camera. So jump on Twitter, join me there, MarkRogersTV. We will debate and discuss college football. If I don't follow you, it's not intentional. So you shout out to me and say, hey, you promised to follow me, and I'll follow you. So that's how that's going to work. Hey, Knight Rider, thanks so much. Yeah, we'll see you in about 35 minutes. That sounds good. Thanks for jumping on and supporting me. I appreciate it. So, yeah, follow me on Twitter. I've got a Facebook page as well at MarkRogersTV. And join me on YouTube. The response there, I got to consider the numbers when I look at all these, and there's very few out there getting hundreds of thousands of views and millions of views and subscribers. I make that comparison, but the amount of growth that we've experienced because of your support has been phenomenal this year, and I'll share those numbers at the conclusion of the year. But I appreciate the support, and the growing community out there of college football fans following Mark Rogers TV. So until next time, we'll come back next week again at 1 o'clock Eastern time on Monday. We'll talk some college football and hope to get some response from you in the meantime. All right, this is Mark Rogers from Mark Rogers TV. You have a great New Year's Eve. Stay safe, have fun, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.